Steve Schmidt, Chris Hayes, we've yet to have your summation of the day we have witnessed so far heading into a 10-way Democratic debate tonight.
It's an extraordinary day in the life of the nation. What we saw today is a plot by the President of the United States that extends up and down throughout the administration. It touches on the Vice President, the Secretary of the State, and the Secretary of State, involved in bribery and extortion of a foreign head of state, Ukraine, which is being militarily invaded on its east by the Russians, and to get political dirt on the former Vice President of the United States, a political opponent. It is a fathomless act of corruption. It is an act of corruption that exceeds by orders of magnitude anything that Richard Nixon did during the Watergate crisis. And this wasn't a never Trumper. This was a, I'll give you $1 million, Donald Trump, to be the ambassador to the Ukraine. And so, to the EU. To the EU. And so, you know, they certainly have the goods on them. And I think the question that Joy asked in the last panel was, if this doesn't meet the line, where is the line?
Yeah.
What is it that you would have to do? And so Donald Trump very famously said he could walk down Fifth Avenue and he could shoot someone and there'd be no reaction. I think what we're going to see is, what about walking down Constitution Avenue to the National Archives and lighting the Constitution on fire? Any objections to that? Because if we're to live in a country where there's no rule of law, the president can do whatever he wants, can investigate through an inducement to a foreign power the former vice president. What's to stop him from using the IRS, weaponizing the Justice Department, jailing a journalist, silencing critics? Does anybody want to live in that type of America? What exactly is the meaning of the oath to the Constitution that these senators took? And to the comments that Joy made in the last panel, we live in really an unprecedented, unparalleled era of cowardice amongst people who have, as you said, significant and important responsibilities. They are stewards of a tradition that began in 1776 and was consummated in 1787 through Civil War, through World War, through assassination, through Great Depression, the stewardship of the oldest constitutional republic in the world. They are acting like they are members of a cult of personality. They are not acting like they are small R Republicans, fidelitous to a system which has been bequeathed to us through profound sacrifice. And so as we watch all of this unfold over the weeks ahead, I think an important and essential question is, where is that line? Yeah. What becomes intolerable in this country when it comes to the corruption of this president and his henchmen?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.